The rain came down in thick gray sheets over Norfolk Naval Station, drumming a steady rhythm against the aluminum skin of the C-37 transport plane. Inside the hangar, the air smelled of jet fuel, hydraulic fluid, and the peculiar metallic chill of a Virginia winter. Colonel Sarah Jenkins stood ramrod straight on the tarmac, the wind tugging at the collar of her standard-issue olive-drab fleece. To the casual observer, she was nothing special, a woman in her early 40s with a no-nonsense ponytail poking out from under a ball cap, her face devoid of makeup, her hands calloused and practical. She carried a single piece of worn canvas luggage, the kind you could pick up at any military surplus store. She looked like a logistics officer, or perhaps a petty officer, headed back to a desk job after a long holiday. What the casual observer couldn't see was the weight of the duffel bag's contents. Buried beneath a spare uniform, in a worn copy of Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, was a box containing a silver star, a bronze star with a V for valor, and a purple heart. They couldn't see the classified orders tucked into an inside pocket, orders that bore the letterhead of the Joint Special Operations Command and identified her as the new commanding officer of a classified Naval Special Warfare Development Squadron. They couldn't see the 2 decades of relentless service, the nighttime halo jumps into the Black Sea, the close-quarters combat in the mud huts of Fallujah, the 18-hour days spent hunched over intelligence reports that determined the fate of high-value targets. To the world, Sarah Jenkins was invisible, and that was precisely how she liked it. Her team, 3 other operators from her incoming command, had already loaded their gear and were lounging inside the plane's cabin. They were men cut from the same cloth, quiet, watchful, with eyes that constantly scanned entry and exit points even in the safety of a stateside hangar. They knew who she was. They had seen her record, heard the whispered stories of the Lady Colonel who could outshoot, outmarch, and outthink nearly everyone in the community. To them, she wasn't a woman. She was the boss, a legend in the making. As Sarah approached the mobile stairway leading to the cabin door, a young pilot in a pristine leather flight jacket stepped out to grab a smoke, cupping his hands against the wind. He was a lieutenant, probably no more than 26, with the boyish face of a college quarterback and the swagger of someone who had been told he was God's gift to naval aviation ever since he'd earned his wings of gold. He glanced at Sarah, his gaze sliding over her wet fleece, her scuffed boots, her lack of rank insignia visible under the jacket. He saw what he wanted to see. A woman, probably prior enlisted, maybe a clerk or a technician, lugging her own bag out to the flight line because she didn't rate anyone to do it for her. "Hey!" he called out, his voice carrying over the wind, tinged with the authority of someone who owned the aircraft. "You can't load that yet. Cleaning crew isn't done. You're going to have to wait." Sarah stopped, looking up at the young man. She didn't flinch. "I'm a passenger," she said, her voice calm and even. The pilot, whose name was Lieutenant Junior Grade Miller, snorted. He looked past her, expecting to see the actual passengers, likely a group of senior officers or high-ranking civilians. He saw his 3 co-pilot and navigator buddies sitting inside, laughing, completely oblivious to the scene on the tarmac. He looked back at Sarah. A passenger? Right. She had the look of a federal technician or a contractor. Maybe she was part of the support staff. "Ma'am, I don't know who told you that, but this is a closed mission flight. Special movement." He stressed the words, puffing his chest out slightly. "You're on the wrong bird. The crew bus for base personnel leaves from the other side of the hangar in 20 minutes. Sarah felt a flicker of annoyance, a tiny spark she quickly extinguished. She'd dealt with this 1,000 times. The assumptions. The microaggressions. The young men who looked at her and saw a secretary, a wife, a girlfriend, anything but a killer. Usually she let it slide. It was a tactical advantage being underestimated. "I'm on the manifest," she said simply, stepping forward. Miller blocked her path, his expression hardening. He wasn't being malicious, not really. In his mind, he was protecting the integrity of his flight. He was the pilot. The plane was his kingdom. "Look, I don't know what game you're playing, but I'm telling you, you're not on the list. I've got the roster inside. It's all officers, mostly 05 and above." He looked her up and down again. "Now I need you to step away from the aircraft. The cleaning crew will be here any minute, and you're holding up the process." The cleaning crew comment hung in the air between them. It was a slap, unintentional or not. In that moment, he hadn't just mistaken her for a passenger, he had categorized her. He had placed her in the box marked domestic help, the invisible women who scrubbed toilets and emptied trash cans on the base. Sarah's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Lieutenant," she said, her voice dropping a register, losing its conversational tone and gaining a hard, flinty edge. "I suggest you go back inside your airplane, pull up the manifest and read it again. Carefully." For a split second, Miller hesitated. There was something in her eyes, a flat, predatory stillness that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. It was the look of someone who had stared down death, and death had blinked. But the moment passed. He was an officer in the United States Navy, and this woman was telling him how to do his job. "Sorry, I don't need to read it again," he snapped, his own temper flaring. "I know who's on my bird. Now move along, or I'll have to call security." He reached for his radio, the ultimate power move of a junior officer with a little bit of authority. That was the breaking point. Sarah dropped her bag. It hit the wet tarmac with a heavy, solid thud that sounded distinctly unclerk-like. Miller glanced down at it, noticing for the first time the faded tag attached to the handle. It was black, with gold embossing. It read simply, "Jenkins, SM, Commander." Miller stared at it, his brain struggling to process. Commander? That was an 05, a full-bird colonel equivalent. His eyes flicked from the tag to her face and back again. The cold realization began to trickle down his spine. At that exact moment, the side door of the plane slid open further, and one of the senior chiefs, a grizzled veteran with a thick beard and tattoos creeping up his neck, stuck his head out. He was looking for the colonel, wondering what was taking her so long. He saw her standing on the tarmac, facing off with the young pilot. He saw the pilot's confused, slightly panicked expression. The chief's eyes narrowed. "Colonel?" the chief called out, his voice loud and respectful. "Everything all right out there? You need a hand with your bag?" The word colonel hit Miller like a physical blow. His face, already pale from the cold, drained of all remaining color. His hand, still holding the radio, dropped limply to his side. The colonel. The high-ranking SEAL colonel his commanding officer had warned him was coming aboard. The one they had been told to treat with the utmost deference. He looked at her. This woman he had just tried to throw off his plane, this woman he had mistaken for the cleaning lady, and his mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Sarah looked at the young man. She could have eviscerated him. She could have demanded his name, called his commanding officer, and ended his career before it had really begun. She had the power to do it, but she didn't. She bent down, picked up her heavy duffel bag with the ease of long practice, and slung it over her shoulder. She took one step up the ladder, then paused, turning back to face him. Her expression wasn't angry. If anything, it was weary. "Lieutenant," she said, her voice soft but carrying absolute authority. "In the future, when you look at a service member, regardless of what they look like or what you think they should be doing, remember this moment. Remember that the uniform doesn't always come with a name tag on the outside, and the hardest workers, the most dedicated fighters, aren't always the ones in the fancy jackets." She climbed the last few steps, pausing at the top to look him in the eye one final time. "You're a pilot, a good one probably, but you've got a lot to learn about the Navy. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'd like to get out of this rain." She stepped into the cabin without another word. The chief glared at the young pilot, a look of pure contempt on his face before slamming the heavy door shut, the sound echoing through the empty hangar. Inside, the three other operators looked up as she entered, sensing the tension. One of them, a master chief with eyes that had seen the worst of humanity, raised an eyebrow in a silent question. Sarah just shook her head, taking a seat and buckling in. "Nothing," she said quietly. "Just a kid who doesn't know what he doesn't know." On the tarmac, Lieutenant Miller stood frozen in the rain, the wind whipping around him. He looked at the closed door of the aircraft, then at the empty space where her bag had been. He replayed the last 5 minutes in his head, the condescension in his voice, the way he had said, "cleaning crew." He felt a hot wave of shame wash over him, so intense it burned despite the cold. He thought of his own mother, a hard-working woman who had sacrificed everything for him. He thought of the female officers he had saluted in the past, the ones he had treated with respect because their rank was visible. He realized with a sickening lurch that his respect wasn't for the person or even the rank. Nay, it was for the display. The flight to Norfolk was quiet and uneventful. Sarah spent most of it staring out the window at the cloud cover, her mind already shifting gears from this minor annoyance to the monumental task awaiting her. She thought about the young pilot. She hoped he learned the lesson. She hoped this moment, embarrassing as it was, would make him a better officer. Most of all, she hoped it didn't harden him into someone who resented the very idea of a woman in a position of power. The military was changing, slowly, painfully, and moments like this were the birth pangs. When the plane touched down and taxied to its spot at the Naval Station Norfolk, the hatch opened to reveal a reception party. A two-star admiral, the commander of Naval Special Warfare Command, stood waiting, along with a handful of other senior officers. And they were there to greet the new colonel, to welcome her to the fold. As Sarah emerged from the plane, the admiral stepped forward, his hand extended. "Colonel Jenkins," he said, his voice booming, "welcome home. We've heard a lot about you." As she descended the stairs, she noticed Lieutenant Miller standing stiffly at attention off to the side, part of the ground crew. His eyes were fixed straight ahead, his face a mask of professionalism. He didn't dare look at her. Sarah shook the admiral's hand, exchanging pleasantries. As she walked past the young pilot, she paused for a fraction of a second. She didn't look at him, didn't acknowledge his presence. She simply walked by, the silver star on her chest catching the pale winter sunlight. A silent rebuke more powerful than any words she could have spoken. Behind her, she left a young man forever changed by a 10-minute interaction. He would never look at a woman in uniform the same way again. He would never assume he knew someone's story by the jacket they wore or the bag they carried. It was a hard lesson, learned on a cold tarmac, delivered by a woman who had fought in wars he could only imagine and led men he would never be worthy of commanding. The incident didn't make the base newspaper. It wasn't mentioned in any official report. It was just a story, destined to be whispered among the enlisted ranks and passed down as a cautionary tale to cocky young pilots for years to come. It was the story of the day the pilot mistook a high-ranking SEAL colonel for the cleaning crew and threw her out, only to realize, far too late, exactly who he was dealing with. And it was a story that Colonel Sarah Jenkins would carry with her, not as a badge of honor, but as a quiet reminder of the long road still ahead, not just for the military, but for the world.